Welcome to the Elder Goth, and as all these tales in which I tell, they are dedicated to my children, my grandchildren, and to my descendants. So when I am not here, you will still be able to hear me. Now let's go. One clear summer night, a young man was walking on the sand by the sea, on an isle. He had been all day in the hayfields and was come down to the shore to cool himself, for it was a full moon and the wind blowing fresh off the water. As he came to the shore, he saw the sand shining white in the moonlight, and on it the sea people dancing. He had never seen them before, for they showed themselves like seals by the day. But on this night, because it was midsummer and a full moon, they were dancing for joy. Here and there, he saw dark patches where they had flung down their seal skins, but they themselves were as clear as the moon itself, and they cast no shadow. He crept a little nearer, and his own shadow moved before him. And all of a sudden, one of the sea people danced upon it. The dance was broken. They looked about and saw him, and with a cry they fled to their sealskins and dived into the waves. The air was full of their soft cries and splashing, but one of the fair people ran hither and thither on the sand, wringing her hands as if she had lost something. The young man looked and saw a patch of darkness in his own shadow. It was the seal's skin. Quickly he threw it behind a rock and watched to see what the sea fairy would do. She ran down to the edge of the sea and stood with her feet in the foam, crying to her people, "Wait for me." Her people had gone too far to hear. The moon shone on her, and the young man thought she was the loveliest creature he had ever seen. Then she began to weep softly to herself, and the sound was so pitiful that he could not bear it no longer. He stood upright and went down to her. "What have you lost, woman of the sea?" he asked her. She turned at the sound of his voice and looked up at him terrified. For a moment he thought she was going to dive into the sea. Then she came a step nearer and held up her two hands to him. "Sir," she said, "give it back to me. I and my people will give you the treasure of the sea." Her voice was like waves singing in a shell. "I would rather have you than the treasure of the sea," said the young man, although she hid her face in her hands and fell again to crying, more hopeless than ever. He was not moved. "It is my wife you shall be," he said. "Come with me now to the priest, and we will go home to our home. And it is yourself shall be mistress of all I have. It is warm you will be in long winter nights, sitting at your own hearth stone, and the peat burning red instead of swimming in the cold green sea." She tried to tell him of the bottom of the sea, where there comes neither snow nor darkness or night, and the waves are as warm as the river in the summer. But he would not listen. Then he threw his cloak around her and lifted her into his arms, and they were married in the priest's house. He brought her home to his little thatched cottage, and in the kitchen was its hearth floor, and set her down before the hearth in the red glow of the peat. She cried out when she saw the fire, for she thought it was a strange crimson jewel. Have you anything, Bonnie, as that in the sea? He asked her, kneeling down beside her. And she said, no, faintly, that he could scarcely hear her. No. I know not what there is in the sea, he said, but there is nothing on land as bonny as you. For the first time, she ceased her crying and sat looking at the heart of the fire. It was the first thing that made her forget, even for a moment, the sea that was her home. All the days was in the young man's house. She never lost the wonder of the fire, and it was the first thing she brought to her children to see. For she had 3 children in twice 7 years she lived with him. She was a good wife to him. She baked his bread and she spun wool for the fleece of his Sheffield sheep. He never named the seal skin to her, nor she to him, and she thought she was content, and he thought she was content, for he loved her dearly, and she was happy with her children. Once, when he was plowing on the headland above the bay, he looked down and saw her standing on the rocks and crying in a mournful voice to a great seal in the water. He said nothing when he came home, for he thought to himself it was not to wonder at as if she was lonely for the sight of her own people. As for the sealskin, he had hidden it well. There came a September evening, and she was busy in the house, and the children were playing hide and seek in the stacks of the gloaming. She heard them shouting and went out to them. "What have you found?" she said. The children came running to her. It's like a big cat," they said, "but it's softer than a cat. Look." She looked and saw her sealskin that had been hidden under the last year's hay. She gazed at it, and for a long time she stood still. It was warm dusk, and the air was yellow with an afterglow of sunset. The children had run away again, and their voices among the stacks sounded like voices of birds. The hens were on the roost already, and now there of them clucking, and the sheep. The air was full of little friendly noises from the sleepy talking of the swallows under the thatch. The door was open, and the warm smell of baking bread came out to her. She turned to go in, but a small breath of wind rustled over the stacks, and she stopped again. It brought a sound that she had heard in so long. She never seemed to hear it at all. It was the sea whispering down on the sand. Far out on the rocks, the great waves broke and boomed, and close on the sand, the little waves slipped racing back. She took up the sealskin and went swiftly down to the track that led to the sands. The children saw her and cried to her to wait for them, but she did not hear them. She was just out of sight when their father came in from the briar, and they ran to tell him. "Which road did she take?" he said. "The low road to the sea," they answered. But already their father was running to the shore. The children tried to follow them, but their voices died away behind him, so fast did he run. As he ran across the hard sands, he saw her dive to join the big seal who was waiting for her, and he gave a loud cry to stop her. For a moment she rested on the surface of the sea, and then she cried with her voice that was like the waves singing in a shell, "Fare ye well, and all good befall you, for you were a good man to me." Then she dived to the fairy places, that lie at the bottom of the sea, and the big seal with her. For a long time, her husband watched for a moment to come, that she would come back to him and the children. But she came no more. This woman of the sea.